The most disturbing story in the Bible isn't what you think. Forget everything you've heard about fire and brimstone. This overlooked tragedy from the Book of Judges makes Game of Thrones look tame. What happened to the concubine of Gibeah is so shocking that biblical scholars still debate why it's even included in Scripture. And in the next 6 minutes, I'm going to walk you through this ancient horror story that changed the course of Israel's history. You might be wondering why you've never heard this story before. Well, it's not exactly the kind of tale they teach in Sunday school. But understanding what happened in Gibeah reveals something profound about human nature that we're still grappling with today. The story begins in the period described as when there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. This wasn't freedom, it was chaos. A Levite man from the hill country of Ephraim had taken a concubine, which was essentially a secondary wife with fewer legal protections. After some kind of dispute, she fled back to her father's house in Bethlehem. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't she just leave him permanently? But in ancient times, women had almost no economic independence. Being unmarried wasn't really an option. So when the Levite came to speak kindly to her and bring her back, returning with him may have been her only viable choice. 4 months later, the Levite travels to her father's house. He's welcomed warmly, and the father-in-law keeps convincing him to extend his stay. This part of the story seems almost pleasant, until you realize what's coming. It's like those peaceful opening scenes in a horror movie, before everything goes terribly wrong. Finally, the Levite decides it's time to leave. Despite his father-in-law's attempts to get him to stay another night, the Levite, his servant, and his concubine set out late in the day. This is the first truly bad decision in a series of catastrophic choices. As night approaches, they need to find shelter. The servant suggests stopping in Gibeah, what would later become Jerusalem, but the Levite refuses because it's controlled by non-Israelites. "We will not turn aside into the city of foreigners," he says. Instead, he pushes on to Gibeah, a town belonging to the tribe of Benjamin. This decision will cost his concubine her life. Here's where things get truly disturbing. The travelers arrive in Gibeah and wait in the town square, but no one offers them hospitality, a serious breach of ancient Near Eastern customs. Finally, an old man, himself a foreigner to the town, invites them to stay at his house. But during the night, the men of the city surround the house, pounding on the door, demanding, "Bring out the man who came to your house, that we may know him." The phrase "to know" here is a euphemism for sexual assault. The parallel to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is unmistakable, but what happens next is even more horrifying. The old man, attempting to protect his male guest, offers his virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine instead. I need to pause here because I know this is shocking to modern sensibilities. This tells us something profound about the ancient world's hierarchy of values. Male honor above female safety. It's a stark reminder of how far we've come, yet how much further we still need to go. What happens next is the most disturbing part of the story. The Levite takes his concubine and puts her outside to face the mob. The Bible describes it with chilling simplicity. They knew her and abused her all night until the morning. When dawn breaks, she crawls back to the doorstep of the house and collapses. In the morning, the Levite finds her. His response is not grief or rage at what was done to her, but a cold command, "Get up, let us be going." When she doesn't respond, because she's either dead or dying, he places her on his donkey and continues his journey home. What the Levite does next transforms this from a personal tragedy to a national catastrophe. Upon reaching home, he takes a knife and cuts his concubine's body into 12 pieces, sending a piece to each of the 12 tribes of Israel with a message about the atrocity committed in Gibeah. This gruesome act triggers a civil war. The other tribes demand that Benjamin hand over the perpetrators for justice. When they refuse, the conflict escalates, nearly wiping out the entire tribe of Benjamin. The text tells us that 25,000 Benjamite warriors were killed, leaving only 600 men alive, with no women to continue the tribe. You might be asking yourself, what's the point of such a horrific story? Why is this in the Bible? The narrative serves as a stark illustration of the book's repeated refrain. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. It shows the devastating consequences of moral relativism and societal breakdown. But there's something else here that speaks to us across the millennia. This story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how societies can fail to protect their most vulnerable members. It's about what happens when community bonds break down, when hospitality is abandoned, when might makes right. And if you think this is just an ancient problem, consider how often we still hear stories of vulnerable people being sacrificed for the sake of preserving power or avoiding inconvenience. The specifics may change, but the fundamental moral challenge remains. The story of the concubine of Gibeah doesn't offer easy answers. There's no happy ending, no divine intervention to save the victim. Instead, it confronts us with a mirror, asking what kind of society we want to build, what values we want to uphold. I've thought a lot about why this particular biblical story isn't better known. Perhaps it's because it doesn't fit neatly into how we want to think about our religious texts. Or maybe it's because it forces us to acknowledge some profoundly uncomfortable truths about human nature and history. But I believe that confronting difficult stories like this one is exactly how we grow, as individuals and as a society. By understanding the depths to which humanity can sink, we gain clarity about the heights to which we must aspire. If this exploration of one of the Bible's most challenging narratives has given you something to think about, hit that like button. If you want more deep dives into the overlooked stories that shaped our cultural inheritance, subscribe to the channel. And if you know someone who appreciates honest conversations about difficult topics, share this video with them. Until next time, remember that understanding our past, even its darkest chapters, is essential to creating a better future.